All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to day 3 of game theory. It's been a minute, but um, I don't really have review slides, so I hope everybody's just ready. Um, yeah, so today we are talking about simultaneous games. Last time we covered sequential games, and which were games that steps were taken one after the other. Now we're going to look at the case when steps aren't taken one after the other. They're taken at the same time. So, uh, what is a simultaneous game? I just said it. Simultaneous game is a game in which players choose their strategy at the same time. So what I have displayed here is basically a game tree, but for a simultaneous game. This is called a game table, and it displays all of the possibilities and outcomes given players selecting specific choices. So if player A chooses top and player B chooses middle, then the final outcome is this. Player A gets 1 point and player B gets the 0 points. So if you recall, we have to remember which number refers to which player. So usually the first number refers to the player on the left and the second number refers to the player on the top. And if the orientation changes, then the first number usually refers to the player who is resting on the whose choices are parallel with the y-axis, and the second number corresponds with the player whose choices are aligned with the x-axis. So that's how you remember that. So pure Nash equilibrium. So the Wikipedia quote is a stable state of a system involving the interaction of different participants in which no participant can gain by unilateral change of strategy if the strategies of each of the other players remain unchanged. Excuse me. So the much easier way to say this, the not annoying way of saying it, is the Nash equilibrium is the situation in which neither player would rather switch their strategy to another as long as the other player stays with their current strategy. So just take my word for it. In this case, this is the Nash equilibrium. Player A goes top, player B goes left. So we'll demonstrate how to find that out later in a variety of different ways. But so let's examine what happens if one player decides to change. So suppose now player B, instead of going left, decides to go middle. Well, player A would still rather stay in top, right? Because no matter where player B goes, I mean, yes, player A would stay in top, but because they will still gain the same amount, and player B will actually lose because if they change, then it's necessarily worse off for them. That's the definition of Nash equilibria. So does everybody understand, or should I re-explain that? If nobody says anything, then I'm just going to move on. So. Okay. Dominant. So here are the different ways of finding this Nash equilibrium. So dominant strategies. A dominant strategy is a strategy that, no matter what the other players choose, will always yield the highest payoff for the player using the dominant strategy. So if a player has a dominant strategy, the other player knows that the first player will choose their dominant strategy. Remember, because all players are rational, all players are aware of everything going on in the game, and thus players can make conclusions about what the other player is going to choose. So let's go to this table. So we have players A and B again, and we have this game table. So just take a quick second to familiarize yourself with the table. So if player A chooses top and player B chooses left, player A will get 10, player B will get 7. If player A chooses the top and player B chooses middle, player A will get 11, and then player B will get 5, and so on and so forth. Right? So let's look at all of the different options that player A given player B making an option, what is player A going to choose? So if player B chooses left, suppose, then player A is going to either choose top, center, or bottom. So if player A chooses top, he'll get 10 points. If player A chooses center, they'll get 2 points. And if player A chooses bottom, they'll get 1 point. So they're going to choose top because that's the highest point value. So now we repeat it for hypothetically supposing player B, chooses middle. So player A can either choose top, center, or bottom. And which one is he going to choose, or which one are they going to choose? Yeah, top. Exactly. So, yup. Okay. Player A is going to choose top because that's the one where they get the most points. And then if player B hypothetically chooses right, then third verse, same as the first two. Player A is going to continue to choose top because it's 9 versus 0 versus 1. So player A is going to choose top. So we can completely eliminate both options center and bottom because no matter what player B chooses, player A is going to choose top. So we cross that out. And now knowing this, player B has to make the call. They can either choose left, middle, or right. So which one are they going to choose? Exactly, they're going to choose left, right? Because if they go left, they get 7, whereas if they go middle or right, they'll get 5 and 4 respectively. So this is one way to find Nash equilibria, but this only works if a dominant strategy exists, and we'll demonstrate that that's not always the case. So dominated strategy. So a dominated strategy is a strategy that no matter what the other player chooses, no matter, let me say that. A dominated strategy is a strategy that no matter what the other players choose, will always yield a lower payoff than another strategy for the player using the dominated strategy. If a player has a dominated strategy, the other player knows that the first player will never choose a dominated strategy. So here's a new game. Quickly acquaint yourselves with this game. Top left is 4-6, top middle is 3-4, top right is 7-0, etc., etc. You get the gist, right? So let's again use this similar style of analysis to see how player A will react given player B's behavior. So hypothetically, if player B were to go left, okay, well, I forgot that I just did it like this. If player B goes left, then player A is going to choose center. If player B goes middle, player A is going to choose center. And if player B goes right, player A is going to choose top. We all understand this, right? Alrighty. So knowing this, player A is never going to choose bottom, right? It is always in their best interest to choose something other than bottom. So bottom is the dominated strategy, right? So we can eliminate it. Now we pivot back and do the same thing, but now we consider player B. So let's use this similar analysis, but I'm going to let you guys do it. So if player A chooses top, which one is player B going to choose? So they can either go left, middle, or right. Yeah, it's left. And if player A goes center, then which one is player B going to choose? Exactly, it's middle. So we know that it's left top and center middle. So that means that right for player B is not a dominated strategy, but in this case, when you've eliminated it, in this sub game, it's a dominated strategy, so you can eliminate it. Okay, now we have a 2x2 game. So, if depending on how many options, it's 2x2, 3x3, it could be 2 by whatever. It's just to describe the game size, we just say how many choices one person has and how many choices the other person has. So now we have to look at player A again. So player B is never going to go right. So that's completely out of the picture. So if player B goes left, then player A is going to either choose top or center, in this case center. And if player B chooses middle, then player A is going to choose center again. So top was not previously a dominated strategy, but now in this sub game it is. So top is eliminated, and now player B has to choose between left and middle, and they're going to choose middle. So center middle is, in this case, the dominant, the Nash equilibrium. So that was a very long process. In a 3x3, it's not the longest thing in the world, but if you have a huge game table, it's going to take forever. I know this because I had to do a huge game table, and it did take forever. So now we're going to learn the method that you use. This is the correct method. The other ones work. If you combine the use of dominance and dominated strategies, you can do it. But best case analysis is simply a combination of those and done much more quickly. So for every given scenario, what strategy should a player choose? And then this overlap in what the player should choose given the strategy the other player is choosing, that's the Nash equilibrium. So kind of a not wonderful description, but I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so here's our game table, right? Let me move things out of the way. Zoom has so much stuff and I have to move it all the time. Okay, so here's our game table. Player A can once again choose top, center, or bottom. Player B can once again choose left, middle, or right. So let's show how this works. So given that player B chooses left, what is player A going to choose? Given that player B chooses middle, what is player A going to choose? And given that player B chooses right, what is player A going to choose? So I kind of already showed it, so I'm not going to ask you. But so if we look at left, player A can either choose top and get 7. So yeah. So they can if player B chooses left, player A can either get 7, 12 or bottom. So player A is going to choose center. If player B chooses middle, player A can either get 8, 3, or 3. So he's going to go top. And if player B goes right, player A can either get 9, 2, or 0. So player A is going to choose top. So yeah, left, center, middle, top, right, top. Exactly. So now let's do the same for player B, right? So I'm going to let you guys do this once because I keep on accidentally advancing slides, which isn't great. So given that player A chooses top, what is player B going to choose? Given that player A chooses center, what should player B choose? And given that player A chooses bottom, what should player B choose? Okay, yeah, people are getting it, exactly. So if player A chooses top, player B is going to choose middle. If player A chooses center, player B is going to again go middle. And if player A goes bottom, player B is going to go right. So we look at the overlap, right? If player A were to choose, the overlap's pretty obvious, it's middle. So to quickly show that this does in fact work, let's analyze what we found. So before assuming that it's correct, let's examine it very quickly. So if player A were to change from top to say bottom or center, they would be changing from 8 to 3 or 8 to 3. So they are actively losing. Now, if player B were to change from middle to left or right, they would change from 8 to either 6 or from 8 to 3. So they are once again losing. So what we have found is the Nash equilibrium. Okay, so can a game only have one equilibrium? No. It can either have one equilibrium, it can have two equilibriums, it can have a bunch of equilibriums, but it can also have no equilibrium. So let's look at this game. So this is an example of more than one equilibrium. Can you guys quickly do the case analysis for both player A and player B? You don't have to come up with the Nash equilibrium, but given that, so let me phrase it better. So given what player B's choice, what should player A do? And given player A's choice, what should player B do? So could you guys quickly do that? Or maybe just do player A. I'll do player B myself. It might take a minute to type out. So instead of saying top, center, bottom, say TCB. Instead of saying left, middle, right, say LMR. Are people doing it or should I do it? I'm perfectly fine doing it myself, but I'm wondering if people are doing it. Okay, somebody has it. So if player B chooses, then player A will do. So if it's left, player A chooses center. If it's middle, player A chooses top. And if right, then top again. Yeah, that's correct. So I'll do B myself. So let's go over it. If player A chooses center, if player B chooses left, player A will go center. If player B chooses middle, player A will go top. And if player B goes right, player A will go bottom. And then for B, if player A chooses top, player B will go middle. If player A chooses center, player B will go left. And if player A chooses bottom, player B will choose right. So as you can see, we found two Nash equilibria. So how players decide which Nash equilibria to do, in this case, it's pretty clear. You have to go with the 7-10, right? Because in that case, both players will gain some points, but in different cases, players may not be able to agree on a Nash equilibrium. In this case, it's probably better for both players to go with, if player B goes left and player A goes center, but sometimes it's not so obvious. So here's an example with no Nash equilibria. So you know what, I'm gonna let you guys prove that there's no Nash equilibria here. Just to make sure that everybody's getting it. People seem to be getting it, but just to triple check, I guess. And no one's asking questions today, which is simultaneously good, also simultaneously bad. So once again, feel free to ask questions. But you guys try to show that this doesn't have a Nash equilibrium. Okay. So yeah, that's correct. If you check chat at the moment it's all correct. So okay, great. At least one person got it. So once again, if you do not understand, please say so, and I will re-go over whatever you don't understand. But somebody got it correct. So if we do the case analysis, if player B goes left, player A goes center, player B goes middle, player A goes top, player B goes right, player A goes top. If player A goes top, player B goes left, player A goes center, player B goes middle, and if player A goes bottom, player B goes right. As you can see, there's no overlap, so in this case, there's no Nash equilibria. What that means is that players are going to have to kind of fiddle in the dark, and we'll get into how they fiddle. I mean, at the moment, with what we know now, they're fiddling in the dark. But next class, which is tomorrow, we'll just talk about what they should be doing in this case. If there's no Nash, then does something exist? So these are a bunch of games that appear incredibly often and that you should just know off the top of your head, right? So they have some specific names, but all of these have a wide variety of applications in the real world. So let's get into it, I guess. Last time I'm asking for questions because at this point I'm assuming you know how game tables work. So absolute final call. Okay, no one's saying anything, so let's go. Okay, pure coordination. So this is basically saying that as long as player A and player B make the same choice, then they will get a point each. So suppose they're choosing between tennis and badminton, and they have to show up to the respective court, but they don't know if the other player is going to do. So long as they either both choose tennis or both choose badminton, then they'll have fun and they'll play the game. But if they don't do that, then they're going to be at some random courts with no one to play with. So it's the Nash equilibrium in this case. There are two. In this case, I'm going to say it because it's fairly obvious. If both choose tennis, that's a Nash equilibrium, and if both choose badminton, that's a Nash equilibrium. However, because there's two Nash equilibria, there's not quite the obvious choice. It's pretty difficult to choose, actually. So I said earlier that these have some real-world applications. So what are some real-world applications you can think of off of the top of your head? Or not off the top of your head, maybe deeper into your head, I don't know. Anybody have any real-world ideas? Okay, having two of the same restaurants in a town. What do you mean by that, I guess? Oh, I see what you mean. So if you have two people and they both want to go to the same restaurant, but there's two different locations, and both people want to end up at the same restaurant, right? Yeah, and there was no specification of which one to go to. Exactly, that's a good example. Basically, two people have to make the choice to go to the same restaurant, but because multiple of that restaurants exist and they necessarily want to eat together, they need to coordinate that. Yeah, that's a good example. Any others? Okay, there didn't seem to be any. Okay, so assurance. So player A and player B once again want to do the same thing, but in this case, one option is significantly more preferable to the other option, which is as long as they both do it, still fine, but not as good. So in this case, we have tennis and going to a coffee shop, and we all know that tennis is the best sport, and going to drink fluids is lame. So just very quickly, what's the Nash equilibria here? What are the Nash equilibria here? Yeah. So it's tennis, tennis, and coffee, coffee. Remember that even Nash equilibrium is not necessarily the best outcome. It's simply the outcome that players can hypothetically agree on. So because so if we examine tennis, tennis, then if either of them switch out, then that person who switches is going to lose a lot of payoff. But the same thing is actually, it's the same case in the coffee shop. So if one of the people leaves, decides not to go to get coffee, then they will also lose a drop in payoff. So it's also the Nash equilibrium, even though it's clearly worse off. Now, the option that's going to be chosen pretty clearly is tennis, tennis, as it is just better. So in this case, the Nash equilibrium, there's even though there's two of them, one is probably pretty obvious, and that's the case with assurance. So once again, what are some cases in real life that you can think of? I mean, this is already a semi-real life example, but are there any real life examples you can think of? Does anybody have any? Okay, seeing two movies that that you both want to see, and that the other movie you both don't really want to see. That was actually the second example I was thinking of, just in case nobody said anything. Yes, exactly. So long as you both see the same movie, you'll get some enjoyment, but it'll be much better if you see a good movie. So yeah, That's the exact example I was thinking of, actually. Okay, next one. Battle of the Sexes. Not a great name. It's obviously, and the story behind it is even worse than the name. So the story behind it is that so there's like a husband and a wife, and the husband wants to do something manly. I don't know, go kickboxing. It's something very traditionally masculine. I can't recall what it is. And the wife wants to go shopping. That much I do remember. It is supposed to be shopping. And as long as they both do the same, then they will both get some payoff. But if the man goes shopping, he's going to get bored and will get less payoff than the woman. And if they go kickboxing, the man is going to get more payoff than his wife. So that's the great and wonderful and not terrible story behind it. But the actual uh, game theoretic ramifications of it are pretty important. So, what are the Nash equilibria in this case? Okay, so some people are a bit confused. So once again, let's clarify it. So let's look at my table and not the kickboxing example. So suppose player B chooses tennis. Player A is also going to choose tennis, right? That's the thing that they prefer anyway. However, if player B chooses badminton, player A, despite not liking badminton as much, is still going to choose badminton. And then the same is the case for player B. So, despite the fact that neither player, there are cases in which both players get a suboptimal result, the two Nash equilibria are both choosing tennis or both choosing badminton. So, while there is no real agreed upon Nash equilibria per se, there are two Nash equilibria. So, do you understand? Is that clear? So, conversing is not allowed. Basically, the reason there are two Nash, both events are Nash equilibria, but both players are basically going to. So, let's go back to pure coordination because in this case, both players simply have to take a guess at what the other player is going to do, right? So because there are two Nash equilibria and both of them are just as good for each player, what they basically have to do is flip a coin, right? There is no real correct way of doing it. Now let's go even further back to this one. In this case, there are also two Nash equilibria. Actually, that's just assurance. In assurance, there are still two Nash equilibria, but because one is clearly better than the other one, both players, knowing that the other player is logical, can assume that they are both going to choose tennis. In pure coordination, however, because it is not immediately obvious which one they should choose, both players can basically do a 50-50 on which one they're going to choose. So, does that make sense? Great. Okay. So let's go back to Battle of the Sexes. So, despite the fact that there are two Nash equilibria, neither one of them is exactly great. So, in this case, once again, players. So, if both players are dumb, then they are probably just going to stick with their preferred thing, right? Player A is going to choose tennis, and player B is going to choose badminton. This is very wrong and very bad because what's really going to happen is that neither of them are going to get what they be the neither of them are going to get any payoff, right? So what they really should be doing is flipping coins in order to just decide which one they'll go to. Choose at random, right? With some percent chance they'll get together, and play the game they prefer, and with some percent chance they'll get together with the game that they don't prefer, and then with some percent chance they are not going to get anything. So, I mean, it's 50% chance that they don't get what they want, 1/4 chance that they get what they want, and then 1/4 chance that they meet, but they don't get what they want. So I need to repeat myself because I said it wrong. It's 50% chance that they don't meet up, so they get the worst case. So what are some examples you can think of in real life? This one's probably not the easiest, but a very easy one to think of. Can anybody think of anything? Some real world examples? Um, that example might be, but I don't think it exactly. I feel like that is aside from the. Okay. So wanting to do something and then your friend, yeah. So if you know that you are doing one of two activities and your friend prefers one activity and you prefer one activity, then and you have to just choose one, yeah, that's an example of battle of the sexes, exactly. Can anybody think of some other examples that are, I guess, more specific? Because that's a very general one, so I'm wondering if this one specifically can be used in a wide variety of ways that are also important for the real world, which is important for real life. Man, that was the worst way to phrase that. Okay. You want to play Minecraft, but your friend wants to play Fortnite. Exactly, right? So long as you play the same game, you'll have fun, but both of you have your preferences. Yeah. So, next one, chicken. So, the game of chicken is a kind of real thing. I mean, it's real to the extent that people have done it, but you shouldn't do it. That's why, I mean, it's real, but don't do it. Basically, it's a game in which two people are both in some car and they're racing towards each other, right? They're going to, if neither of them swerve, then a collision occurs. But if one of them swerves, the person who swerved is going to lose some honor because they are a disgrace. And the person who didn't swerve is going to get glory because they're cool and didn't swerve. So what's the Nash equilibria in this case, given the table I'm presenting? Does anybody have any ideas? Oh, give me a second. Chat disappeared once again, which is truly great. Okay, swerve straight and swerve straight, or straight swerve and swerve straight. Exactly. Which is, so that's the Nash equilibrium, right? But once again, that is not a very convenience Nash equilibrium for the person who's swerving because you're going to be a chicken. So what may happen in this game is that instead of some person swerving, you are both going to crash. A negative, obviously meaning a bad payoff, just in case you wasn't obvious. So Chicken is an interesting game because despite, I mean, it's almost like um, Battle of the Sexes, but it's more severe if people cannot make an agreement. Um, so if they both swerve, nothing happens. But if they both go straight, then they are going to die probably. A -10 payoff is probably quite a low one. So because of this, Chicken is, in my opinion, one of the cooler things to examine. Although you probably already know. I mean, I already showed it by accident, but the next thing is to generally, I mean, it is the most interesting one to look at. So um, in Chicken, because of this scenario, it is pretty hard to be logical. It's not even necessarily obvious whether you should swerve and go straight in an exact 50-50. Um, so, yeah. What are some other examples of things similar to Chicken? This one might be hard. So I'll give you guys some more time than usual to find examples for this. I'll give you 5 minutes, let's say. I'll set a timer. I'll give you until, because this is kind of weird. In the meantime, I also have to think that because I had notes and now they are gone because I'm in a different country. Uh, okay, so I see one example. So a more moderate version of this would be walking down a sidewalk during lockdown and you don't want to come into contact with anyone. So if there's another person walking your way, you can either go straight or go onto the edge of the road. Yeah, so that's a good example. Yeah, you can either, so both players can either choose to continue going or one person's going to walk on the sidewalk. So if they both walk, or they can both kind of go to the edge of the road. So let's say that if they both go onto the edge of the road, then they can, let's say they magically phase through each other or something. I don't care. Maybe one person kind of goes out to the sidewalk on the side of the road, and the other person kind of steps into this. What's on the other side of the sidewalk? I guess business fronts. I don't know. Um, so if they both do that, nothing bad happens. If one person decides to kind of veer and the other person goes straight, then maybe the person going straight's going to have more a good time, and the person who veers isn't. And if you both go straight, I mean, it depends how straight you're going. You either are going to crash again or you're going to cough on each other. So yeah, that's a good example. Political debates. I don't know exactly what you mean by that. It's a bit vague. Whether to fight someone or not. That seems, I mean, it depends how you define the fighting. I mean, that just sounds kind of mean. I mean, if nobody, I guess the way you're phrasing it is if nobody fights, then nothing bad happens. If one person decides to fight and the other person doesn't, Does the fighter sucker punch the other person? And if they both fight, do they just beat each other up? That's a rather bleak example in the way I'm interpreting it. So, I mean, I guess. Now, if there is some reason to fight, okay. Okay, so with the political debates, it's discussing whether a person would show up or not. Um, so if neither person shows up, nothing happens. If one person shows up and the other person doesn't, then the person who shows up says, "Wow, this guy's a coward. He didn't bother to show up." And then if they both show up, maybe it just goes so poorly for both of them. So I guess, yeah. Or you can slightly no, that wouldn't work. I disregarded what I was about to say, but you didn't hear what I was about to say, so you can't disregard it. Okay, so people seem to get it. We had, I mean, less than a minute of the timer left. So yeah, my example is so the example every game theory textbook really likes is nuclear missile crisis. So in the Cold War. So in essence, if neither country launches a missile, then they will both be fine. If one country decides to launch a missile and the other one does not, the country who launched the missile will be, will have a great time. They destroyed, the U.S. destroyed the Soviet Union, or the Soviet Union destroyed the U.S. If they both nuke each other, however, that's bad. I feel like that qualifies as a bad thing. So if you ever read a game theory textbook, you are going to get a bunch of Cold War, oh, Cuban Missile Crisis, this, oh, nuclear submarine issue, that. They don't shut up about it. Okay, now for the one everyone's been waiting for, Prisoner's Dilemma. So this one has a bit of a story. So two prisoners have been captured. If you read it in a game theory textbook, they will be specifically captured by the, I'm forgetting the name of the Soviet Secret Service, but they are captured by Soviets because it's a game theory textbook, and they are being questioned individually. KGB, thank you. So these people are in separate rooms being interrogated, and they say, okay, listen, you can either decide to defect your partner, or you can decide to help. Okay, I said that wrong. So defect means they are defecting from the agreement, right? That basically just means it's my partner. My partner did it, right? However, cooperating means that you cooperate with your partner, basically saying, I don't know, I didn't do it. So if both cooperate, if both says, no, I didn't do it, let's say that the KGB will only throw them in for, pickpocketing. They'll get 1 year each. However, if one partner says, I didn't do anything, and the other partner says, no, he did, he's lying, then the other person, one partner, the person who said nothing, is going to get into jail for 10 years, both for, robbing a bank and for lying under oath. However, if both players say he did it, then they're both telling the truth, so they'll just get in for breaking into the bank. So what is the Nash equilibrium here, given this table? Okay, both people probably should cooperate, but what is the Nash equilibrium? Okay, so I think I need to do this. So let's examine the cases one by one again. So suppose player B, yeah, it's both defect, but let me explain why. So player B is going to, suppose player A knows that player B is going to defect. So player A knows that if they cooperate, player B is going to get off free with nothing, and player A is going to get sent to jail for both lying and for robbing a bank. So he's going to get 10 years in jail. However, if he also rats out player B, he's only going to get 8 years because he's only breaking into a bank and not lying. And if player B defects, then player A is going to defect. If player B chooses to cooperate, then player A would rather defect, right? He would rather rat out his friend, because if he cooperates too, then he's going to get 1 year in jail. But if he defects, then he's getting no years in jail. He's getting out of there, right? So player A is going to always defect. And the same is the case with player B. So the Nash equilibrium is actually both defect. So does everybody understand why it's defect effect? If not, I can go over it again, but I just need to make sure that this is one of the most important games. It's probably the most important game out of anything I've mentioned here, so I want to make sure that people are understanding it. If nobody says anything, I'm just going to move on. Actually, I don't have much to move on to. So, okay, people are understanding it. So it's a rather bleak scenario, right? Both players would rather sabotage each other than help each other. So this is when you can, instead of viewing it as a static game, we can actually repeat the game. If you remember our first lesson, one thing I discussed is what happens when you repeat games. So in all these games with multiple Nash equilibria, or not great Nash equilibria, you can actually change up what you do. So let's go back to every game and just discuss what happens if you repeat it. And this one, if you repeat it, you just constantly choose randomly, right? You're going to flip a coin and you're going to say, oh, I'll go tennis this time and badminton this time, etc., etc. In assurance, both players are always going to choose the option which is the best. In this game, it's again going to be 50-50. However, if cooperation is possible, then what might instead happen is that players both choose the same thing all the time, but you cooperate to see which ones you choose at a given moment, such that you choose the equal amount, right? Let me say that in a much more understandable way. You decide, hey, let's do tennis today, badminton tomorrow, tennis the day after, and just off and off, off and on and off and on. Chicken is also a pretty complex game. There isn't an easy one for chicken, and Prisoner's Dilemma is probably the most complex one, right? Because the Nash equilibrium is so terrible, repeating the game means that it's going to get very interesting very fast. So when you're repeating Prisoner's Dilemma, you actually have to come up with strategies to do well. So if you always defect, then you are always going to do some, you're either going to get -8 or 0. And if you always cooperate, you're either going to get -1 or -10. So always defecting is better than always cooperating. But there was actually a competition held at some point, I don't remember, where somebody said, okay, give me a bunch of algorithms for repeating Prisoner's Dilemma and choosing whether to defect or cooperate, and I'll run them against each other, see which ones do the best. Some were pretty simple. One obvious one is defect versus, always defecting. But some were very advanced. Some guy made something that was like very much proto AI. But generally, what people will do is, based on your previous actions, how are you going to act now? So what do you think is the best out? I mean, you guys probably won't be able to come up with it. But if you had to guess, if you were going to play Prisoner's Dilemma a lot of times, well, how would you, do it? I'm just curious. Some of you might know the answer. I have a feeling a lot of you, not a lot of you, but at least some of you know the answer. So if you just had to come up with a very simple strategy to repeat Prisoner's Dilemma, what would you do? Okay. Alrighty, so I think 3 is enough. So always defect is the first one. It depends on player B's decision, but I would defect all the time. And then the third one I heard is, or not heard, whatever, is defect 4/5 and 1/5 cooperate, which is certainly interesting. I haven't heard that one. So there isn't a provably optimal strategy. But in all of this, and all these extremely complicated possibilities, and all of these extremely simple possibilities, it turned out that the best one is called tit for tat, which basically means that so the game starts, and based on what the opponent did last, I will do that. So if in the last turn the opponent defected, then I will also defect. If the previous turn the opponents cooperated, then I will also cooperate. Basically, what it's doing is saying to the other algorithm, hey, as long as you help me, I'll help you. But if you try to stab me in the back, I will stab you in the back afterwards. So that's the best one, according to, I mean, it's not the best one. It is the best one, but it's not, mathematically provably the best one. So I find that very interesting. If you want to learn more, I mean, there's a bajillion things about this. You can probably find the Wikipedia article about this. You can find a ton of stuff. There's a Planet Money podcast. If any of you listen to podcasts, you can find it. Just search up Planet Money, Prisoner's Dilemma. You'll probably find it. But it's a very interesting thing. We aren't really going to talk about repeated games a whole lot. Simply put, we don't have the time. But if you are interested, that's a good place to start, I guess. So before class ends, does anybody have some ideas about more real life examples of prisoner's dilemma? I mean, when I say more real life, I don't mean more real life. I mean just more examples in real life. You know what I mean. This one, again, might be kind of difficult. I'm not going to give you guys the full 5 minutes because we are 2 minutes. Actually, it's nothing. Let's go until 8:05. You know what? 5 minutes extra. Okay, maybe we shouldn't go until 8:05. I don't know. I said 8:05. Let's wait until 8:05. Could you? Okay, winning a prize. If I. So about the winning the prize thing, I guess what it could be is suppose two players are kind of on a team and they win a prize, and both people can agree to either, you know, split the prize or keep the prize for themselves, and if they make the greedy decision, they get nothing, something along that lines. I'm sure, yeah, that could be it. And you have to decide whether to keep it or to split it. And I'm sure if you frame that the right way, once again, that's the general point of this class, frame it correctly, and then you can probably do something. But I guess I'd have to make that more specific. Not a bad example, but well, if you added numbers to it, then it would probably work. So I guess we're done today, unless anybody has some last minute stuff. It's real last minute now. So thanks a lot, everybody who came. We have class tomorrow, same time. I would say same place, but I don't really know if you're in the same place. I'm not. So I hope everybody had a good class, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.